respected. Have you ever watched someone smile in front of the world, laugh with other people, post pictures that make it look like they've completely forgotten you, yet deep inside your heart, you still felt that something wasn't real? Have you ever wondered why the loudest goodbye often belongs to the person who is hurting the most? Stay with me, because today you may finally understand why a person can fake moving on, but silence always exposes the emotional attachment they could never truly escape. You know, one of the greatest mistakes people make is believing what they see. They see someone posting happy pictures. They see someone acting confident. They hear people saying, he's doing just fine. He replaced you. He forgot you. But life has taught me something. The people who truly move on don't spend their lives proving they have moved on. Think about that. Peace is quiet. Healing is quiet. Growth is quiet. When someone has genuinely found peace, they don't wake up every morning trying to convince the world they're happy. They simply live their lives. But emotional attachment is different. It hides. It pretends. It smiles when it's breaking. It laughs while it's bleeding. And then one day, silence tells the truth that words never could. Let me tell you a story. There was a young woman named Sarah. She loved one man with everything she had, not because he was perfect, not because he always made her happy, but because when she looked into his eyes, she saw a future she wanted to believe in. For years, she gave him her patience. She celebrated his victories. She stood beside him during failures. She became the person who remembered his mother's birthday when he forgot. She learned exactly how he liked his coffee. She could tell he was having a bad day simply by the way he closed the front door. That's what love does. Love notices the little things. Love remembers details. Love builds a home inside another person's heart. But sometimes people become comfortable. He started believing she would always be there. Calls became shorter. Messages became colder. Promises became later. Excuses became longer. And appreciation slowly disappeared. She cried quietly. Not because she wanted attention. She cried because every woman knows the difference between being loved and being tolerated. One night, she asked him a simple question. Do you still love me? He looked away. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he laughed. Then he said something that shattered her soul. Why do you always ask so many questions? Notice something. When people don't want to face the truth, they attack the question instead of answering it. Sarah didn't argue. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply became quiet. Now understand something very important. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is the strongest sentence a broken heart can ever speak. For weeks, she stopped chasing conversations. She stopped asking where they stood. She stopped trying to rescue a relationship that only one person was carrying. And eventually, she walked away. Now here's where the story becomes interesting. The man acted like he didn't care. Within days, there were pictures online, friends, parties, trips, smiles. Everyone said the same thing. He moved on fast. He never really loved her. Look how happy he is. Sarah heard every word. Every single one. Those words cut deeper than knives. She began questioning herself. Maybe she wasn't enough. Maybe she wasn't beautiful enough. Maybe she loved too much. Maybe she expected too much. Maybe she was easy to replace. How many of you listening have asked yourselves those same questions? You looked at someone else's happiness and assumed it meant your value disappeared. But listen carefully. Someone else's performance is not proof of your worth. People become actors when they're trying to hide pain. Life has taught me something remarkable. Real attachment doesn't disappear because somebody uploads a smiling picture. Real attachment doesn't vanish because someone changes their relationship status. Real attachment stays hidden inside ordinary moments, late at night, early in the morning, during birthdays, during holidays, while driving familiar roads, while hearing songs that suddenly become impossible to finish. Months passed. Sarah focused on herself, not because she stopped hurting, but because pain finally convinced her that waiting wasn't healing. She started reading books again. She joined a small fitness class. She visited her parents more often. She laughed without pretending. She prayed longer than she ever had before. Every day she chose herself, even when choosing herself felt impossible. Meanwhile, no one really knew what was happening with him because social media only shows the performance. It never shows the empty room after midnight. It never shows someone staring at an old conversation they promised themselves they would delete. It never shows trembling hands hovering over your name before deciding not to send the message. People judge healing by photographs. God judges healing by the condition of the heart. One evening, almost 9 months later, Sarah received no message, no phone call, nothing, just silence. And strangely, that silence no longer hurt because something inside her had changed. She no longer needed him to explain why he left. She no longer needed revenge. She no longer needed him to regret losing her. She simply wanted peace. That's when something unexpected happened. Far away, the man found himself sitting alone in his apartment. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. Music played softly, but he couldn't hear it. His friends were texting, but he ignored every message. And for the first time, there was no audience, no pictures to post, no one to impress, just him and silence. You see, silence is dangerous because silence removes distractions. It introduces you to the person you've been running from, yourself. He opened an old drawer. Inside was a small movie ticket they had saved from their very first date. He smiled. Then he cried. Not because he suddenly fell in love again, because the silence forced him to remember what he had buried under pride. That's the thing about emotional attachment. You can outrun places. You can replace routines. You can meet new people. But you cannot outrun unfinished emotions. They wait patiently. They wait until life finally becomes quiet enough for you to hear them. And when that moment comes, no amount of pretending can protect you anymore, because silence has a language that every attached heart understands. It whispers memories, it replays conversations, it reminds you of the hands you once held without realizing they would one day become strangers. And suddenly, all the confidence you showed the world begins to crack, not because you are weak, but because truth always survives longer than performance. That is why people can fake moving on in public. But in private, silence exposes every emotional attachment they thought they had escaped. The greatest lesson is this: never measure someone's feelings by how loudly they appear to move on. Measure them by what happens when the world grows quiet. That is where every heart eventually tells the truth. The truth about life is that time does something very strange to the human heart. In the beginning, pain is loud, it screams, it begs, it asks questions that never seem to have answers. Every place reminds you of them. Every song sounds like it was written about your story. Every sunrise feels empty because the person you imagined beside you is no longer there. But then something happens that most people never expect. The pain becomes quiet. And when your pain becomes quiet, someone else's begins to wake up. Not because life is trying to punish anyone. Not because karma always works like people imagine, but because emotions delayed are never emotions destroyed. They're simply waiting for silence. The man who looked so confident after Sarah left kept living his life exactly the way everyone expected. He smiled, he joked, he traveled, he met new people. If anyone asked about Sarah, he'd shrug his shoulders and say, "She's doing her thing, I'm doing mine." Simple, short, controlled. Nobody noticed that every time her name was mentioned, he changed the subject. Nobody noticed he never deleted her number. Nobody noticed he still knew her birthday without checking a calendar, because the deepest attachments rarely announce themselves. They hide in habits. Months turned into a year. Sarah had become someone entirely different, not because life became easy, because she stopped expecting someone else to rescue her happiness. She learned that healing isn't forgetting someone. Healing is remembering them without losing yourself. One Saturday afternoon, she walked into a bookstore. She wasn't searching for love anymore. She was searching for peace. As she browsed through the shelves, an elderly woman smiled at her. "You look lighter," the woman said. Sarah laughed softly. "You don't even know me." The woman nodded. "I don't have to. I know the difference between someone carrying heartbreak and someone who has finally put it down." Those words stayed with Sarah because that was exactly what had happened. She hadn't erased the memories. She simply stopped carrying them everywhere she went. Meanwhile, across the city, he was becoming someone nobody recognized, not on the outside, on the inside. He found himself comparing every conversation to the ones he used to have with Sarah. Every dinner felt rushed. Every laugh sounded forced. Every relationship seemed to miss something he couldn't explain. He kept telling himself, maybe I just haven't met the right person. But deep inside, he knew the problem wasn't the people he met. The problem was that his heart was still standing in yesterday while his body kept walking into tomorrow. Have you ever noticed something? People often confuse distraction with healing. They're not the same. You can fill your calendar. You can surround yourself with friends. You can start another relationship. You can stay busy from sunrise until midnight. But when your head finally touches the pillow, there is nowhere left to run. That's when silence arrives. Silence doesn't knock. It simply sits beside you. And suddenly, you remember the smallest things, the way she laughed before finishing a sentence, the way she looked out the car window during long drives, the way she always said, "Text me when you get home." Little things, funny, isn't it? We spend relationships chasing big moments, anniversaries, vacations, expensive gifts, yet after they're gone, it's always the little things that refuse to leave. One rainy evening, he drove past a small coffee shop where they had spent countless afternoons together. Without thinking, he slowed the car. The building hadn't changed. The old sign still hung above the door. People sat inside laughing. Life had continued, but for a moment, his heart hadn't. He remembered Sarah sitting across from him. She wasn't talking about expensive dreams. She wasn't asking for impossible promises. She had simply looked into his eyes and said, "I don't need perfection. I just need consistency." Back then, he thought consistency was ordinary. Now he understood. Consistency is one of the rarest forms of love. Anyone can love you when life is exciting. But staying, choosing someone again and again, that takes character. He whispered to himself, "I should have listened." But regret has a cruel habit. It teaches lessons after the opportunity has disappeared. Sarah never knew that coffee shop became one of the places he could no longer visit. She never knew he parked outside several times without going in. She never knew he would sit in his car staring at the window, wondering how two people who once shared dreams became strangers. Because emotional attachment doesn't always make people chase you immediately. Sometimes it makes them freeze. Pride becomes a prison. Fear becomes a chain. They want to reach out, but they remember the pain they caused. They imagine rejection. They imagine hearing silence on the other end of the phone. So they do nothing. And every day they do nothing, the attachment grows heavier. One night he finally opened their old messages. Thousands of conversations, tiny jokes nobody else would understand, photos of ordinary days that suddenly looked priceless, voice messages, plans, promises. He listened to one recording. Sarah's voice filled the room. "You always overthink everything," she laughed. "I'll still be here tomorrow." He paused the recording, closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, he cried without trying to stop himself. Not loud, not dramatically, just quiet tears, the kind that fall when nobody is watching, the kind that reveal what pride has hidden for too long. You see, a man can fool his friends. He can fool his coworkers. He can fool social media. but he cannot fool his own soul forever. Eventually, silence introduces him to the truth, and the truth is rarely comfortable. At that same moment, Sarah was sitting on her balcony watching the rain. She smiled, not because she had forgotten him, but because she had forgiven herself. She finally understood that loving someone deeply was never her mistake. Ignoring her own worth had been. There is a powerful difference. Never apologize for having a big heart. Apologize only when you abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. That realization changed everything. She no longer asked why he didn't fight for her. She asked something much more important. Why had she fought so hard for someone who had stopped fighting for her? Sometimes the most important question isn't why they left. It's why you stayed long after they stopped choosing you. As the rain continued to fall, Sarah whispered a prayer. She didn't pray for him to come back. She didn't pray for revenge. She prayed for freedom. God, if someone is meant to walk beside me, let them value my heart before they lose it. That prayer carried a strength she had never known before. Because healing reaches its deepest point when your desire for peace becomes greater than your desire for answers. Far away, the silence around him grew even louder. He looked at his phone again. Her number was still there. His thumb hovered over the call button. One tap, just one tap. But fear held him still. Not fear of hearing her voice, fear of discovering she no longer needed his. That is one of the greatest fears of an emotionally attached heart. Not that the other person hates you, but that they have finally learned how to live without you. And in that unbearable silence, he realized something he had spent months trying to deny. He hadn't truly moved on. He had only been running, and no one can outrun a heart that still remembers. There comes a moment in every person's life when the heart stands before a mirror that cannot lie. Not the mirror hanging on the bedroom wall, the mirror called truth. And truth has a voice unlike any other. It doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It simply whispers the words you've spent months trying not to hear. He sat alone that night, staring through the apartment window as the city lights flickered in the distance. Cars passed by, people laughed somewhere below. Life kept moving, but inside him, time had stopped. For the first time since Sarah walked away, he stopped blaming circumstances. He stopped blaming stress. He stopped blaming work. He stopped blaming timing. Because deep inside, he finally admitted the one thing pride had refused to confess. He had taken love for granted. You see, many people don't lose the love of their life because someone else steals them. They lose them because they slowly stop noticing them. Love rarely dies in one dramatic moment. It dies in 1,000 tiny moments. The unanswered message, the forgotten promise, the conversation that was always postponed, the hug that became shorter, the appreciation that slowly disappeared. People don't suddenly feel unloved. They slowly realize they are no longer being cherished. Sarah had never asked him for luxury. She never asked for perfection. She never expected a fairy tale. She simply wanted to feel chosen every single day. That is all real love has ever wanted. Not perfection, presence. Not expensive gifts, consistency. Not beautiful words, beautiful actions. As these memories flooded his mind, another memory surfaced, one he had buried beneath months of pretending. It was winter. Sarah had been sick with a high fever. She insisted she was fine. She smiled through the pain because she never wanted to become anyone's burden. Instead of staying with her, he had gone out with friends, promising he would visit later. Later never came. She never complained. The next morning, she simply said, "It's okay." But now, sitting alone in the silence, he finally understood. Sometimes it's okay is the saddest sentence a loving heart can ever speak, because it often means I've accepted that I can't expect more from you. That realization broke something inside him. He lowered his head into his hands and whispered, "I'm sorry." But apologies spoken into an empty room cannot travel back in time. There is something every listener needs to hear today. Never wait until silence teaches you the value of someone who spoke love into your life every single day. By the time silence becomes your teacher, the lesson is often expensive. Across town, Sarah's life looked completely different. She had started volunteering at a small community center every weekend. She met people carrying burdens far heavier than her own. A widowed father struggling to raise 2 children. An elderly woman whose family rarely visited. A teenage girl who believed she would never be enough. Listening to their stories changed Sarah. She realized heartbreak had made her kinder instead of bitter. And that is one of the greatest victories a human being can ever achieve. Pain can either harden your heart or deepen your compassion. One afternoon, while helping organize donated books, a little boy walked up to her. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He held an old, worn-out teddy bear with one missing eye. "Do you think this is broken?" he asked. Sarah smiled gently. "No. It looks broken. It looks loved." The little boy hugged the teddy bear tightly and ran off. Sarah stood there frozen because suddenly she realized that was her heart. It wasn't broken. It had simply loved deeply, and there is honor in that. Never let anyone make you ashamed of loving sincerely. The world has enough people who know how to leave. It desperately needs people who know how to love. Days later, something unexpected happened. He saw Sarah by accident, not through a picture, not through social media, in real life. She was walking across a park with a quiet confidence he had never noticed before. There was no anger on her face, no sadness, no desperate hope that he would notice her. She was simply peaceful. He remained inside his car, watching from a distance. For months he had imagined this moment. He thought she would still look heartbroken. He thought she might cry. He thought she might look back. Instead, she kept walking, not because she hated him, because she had finally stopped waiting for him. That single moment hurt more than every lonely night he had experienced. Why? Because nothing is more painful than realizing someone you once depended on your presence has learned how to live happily without it. He finally understood something Steve Harvey has often taught in different ways through life lessons. People don't appreciate water until they become thirsty. People don't appreciate peace until chaos enters their lives. And too often, people don't appreciate loyal hearts until they are surrounded by temporary ones. For the first time, he didn't want another distraction. He didn't want another party. He didn't want another conversation that meant nothing. He wanted one thing, a second chance. But life doesn't promise second chances. It only promises consequences. That evening, he walked through his apartment slowly. Everything looked ordinary. The couch, the kitchen, the photographs packed away inside a box. Yet everything felt different because silence had finally completed its work. It had stripped away every excuse, every defense, every illusion, leaving only the truth. He still loved the woman he convinced everyone he had forgotten. Not the idea of her. Her, the woman who believed in him before success. The woman who celebrated him before anyone else noticed him. The woman who quietly carried pieces of his brokenness while hiding her own. He realized something that shattered him completely. Sarah hadn't left because she stopped loving him. She left because she finally started loving herself enough to stop accepting less than she deserved. There is a difference, a painful difference. When someone leaves because they don't love you anymore, there may still be room for persuasion. But when someone leaves because they finally respect themselves, only genuine transformation has any hope of changing the story. Silence had exposed his emotional attachment, but it had also exposed something even deeper. Character is not revealed when everything is going your way. Character is revealed when you finally understand the cost of your own choices. As dawn slowly approached, he looked at his reflection in the dark window. For months, he had been pretending to move on. Now he understood the greatest deception had not been towards Sarah. It had been toward himself. Because the hardest person to fool is the one who shares your silence every single night. He picked up his phone once more, this time not to satisfy loneliness, not to ease guilt, Not because he was afraid of being alone, but because for the first time, he understood that love is never measured by how loudly someone says, "I love you." It is measured by how faithfully they choose you when life becomes ordinary. His fingers trembled as he looked at her name. Outside, the morning sun began to rise. Inside, a different kind of dawn had begun. The painful awakening of a man who finally understood that silence had revealed what pride had hidden all along. The most beautiful love stories are not the ones where two perfect people find each other. They are the ones where two imperfect people learn that love is a responsibility before it is a feeling. As we come to the end of this journey, I want you to close your eyes for just a moment and think about the people who have loved you without asking for applause. Think about the person who checked if you got home safely, the one who remembered the little things, the one who celebrated your victories as if they were their own, the one who stood beside you when life offered you nothing but storms. Now ask yourself one question. Did they leave because they stopped loving you? Or did they leave because they grew tired of being the only one protecting what the two of you were supposed to build together? That question changes everything. Because sometimes the greatest tragedy in love is not losing someone. The greatest tragedy is realizing their value only after your silence becomes louder than their voice. You see, a person can fake happiness. They can fake confidence. They can fake indifference. They can post photographs that convince the entire world they have never looked back. But there is one thing no human being can fake forever: peace. Real peace doesn't need an audience. Real peace doesn't need to prove itself. Real peace quietly enters a heart that has learned to forgive, to grow, and to let go. And that is why silence is so powerful. Silence strips away every performance. It removes every distraction. It leaves a person alone with their memories, their choices, and their truth. For the one who walked away after giving everything, silence slowly becomes freedom. At first, it feels unbearable. You reach for your phone. You replay old conversations. You wonder if they'll ever understand what they lost. But one morning, you wake up and something is different. The weight isn't as heavy. The tears don't arrive as quickly. Their name no longer controls your heartbeat. Now, the life you thought had ended quietly begins again. Not because they came back, because you came back to yourself. That is real healing. And for the one who pretended to move on, silence becomes a mirror. Every forgotten promise returns. Every careless word echoes. Every moment of neglect stands before them, asking a question that cannot be ignored. Why didn't you love them while you still had the chance? Sometimes they reach out, sometimes they don't. Sometimes pride wins. Sometimes fear keeps them frozen. But whether they make the call or remain silent forever, one truth never changes: a heart that was genuinely loved never forgets. It simply learns to live with what it can no longer hold. If you're listening today because someone left you, don't spend your life chasing explanations. Don't measure your worth by someone else's inability to recognize it. Your value did not disappear because someone failed to protect your heart. Diamonds do not become ordinary because someone walks past them without looking. Your kindness is not weakness. Your loyalty is not foolishness. Your ability to love deeply is not something to apologize for. The right person will never make you feel ashamed for caring. They will thank God that someone still knows how to love with honesty in a world that has become comfortable with pretending. And if you're listening today because you recognize yourself in the man from this story, don't wait another year. Don't wait until another birthday passes. Don't wait